Welcome back to the Offensive Line. My name is Hanson, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Tim. Now, I've known Tim for quite some time now. I remember when he first came into the RGC, and actually RGC was where he got saved, and he's one of my closest friends. He was a groomsman alongside with Josh and someone else you'll meet a little later as well, but he's here on this episode to share with us about the question, what is man's basic need? So how have you used this question before? What are your thoughts regarding this question? If you could share with us a little bit about your strategies, I guess, with this particular question.
Yeah, I really like this question. And I think just to kind of preface before I talk about the question is that this is typically a question that you want to ask in the middle of a conversation. And the reason why is because you do want to build a relationship with the other person and kind of get to know them a little bit and to really assess whether or not this is a question that would be worthwhile asking the other person. And when you get to that point and you've assessed that, oh, I want to ask them what man's greatest need is or man's basic need is, then you want to ask them the question because they'll respond in two typical ways. They'll say, man's basic problem is something, and then obviously that gives you an avenue to talk about the gospel and why whatever they said is incorrect. Or they'll say, man doesn't really have any problems, right? Man is just innately good. And then you also have another avenue to go in and talk about the gospel.
Yeah.
So it's a very versatile question in that once you ask the question, it kind of opens up the playing field into just introducing the gospel at any different point. Because now that you've asked them their opinion, they're typically going to want to hear what you have to talk about.
Yeah, then you can share what man's basic need actually is, or greatest need actually is.
Yeah.
So just curious, what are some... you have somebody who does recognize that man has a problem, but doesn't recognize that rightly that the problem is sin. So what are some other responses that you've heard or that you've gotten from other people?
Yeah, I think typically when people say that, they can see that there's a problem in the world, right? And obviously not everything is all unicorns and rainbows. And there's something that they can see. It's wrong. And typically some of the responses I get, they talk about, man's greed, or people just need to be nicer to each other, or, there's mental illnesses going around. And any one of those answers, they don't address the problem of sin, right? And if they don't want to address the problem of sin, well, then it's kind of difficult to address man's greatest problem.
Yeah. Man's greatest problem is that there's no world peace. Yeah, no, definitely. I think, very, very fun question. It reminds me of when we were in year 1 or year 2 of Academy, our leadership training class at RGC, where we were going through a number of books where we were reading Francis Schaeffer, where one of the questions was, from the homework, was this question exactly, right? So, and we talked about how that the basic need, or the problem at least, is that there is sin in this world. So the solution to sin then is the gospel, right? I think one thing very important in evangelism is that we want people to see how great their need is, and then when you share Christ with them, then they'll just be ready to run.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one thing that is that I did want to ask you as well, it's something I always ask for our guests, is when you would use this particular question as opposed to other questions. I know you already shared a little bit, but say like you said, this question is not one that you would start the conversation with, but one you would ask in the middle. But say you're in relational evangelism, you're having a relationship with them, and then something about this person, and then you think to yourself, okay, I'm going to ask this particular question. What sort of indicator would make you ask this question?
I think that's a fun question to consider. One of the things that I probably would look for is whether or not they're open to having a conversation about, the world's problems or the world's needs. And generally when they talk about the world's needs, it's very easy for them because it's, very distant, very far away. It's not really personal.
Yeah.
And once you start talking about the world's needs or man's basic need, then you can talk about the gospel, share about what the Bible has to say about it, and then really drill it down to the personal aspect of it, right? One indicator that I would typically look for in terms of wanting to ask this question is whether or not in the relationship that we've talked about things about religion before, right? And if we've talked about religion or we've talked about some of the world's problems before, this is typically one that you can probably just go in like pretty easily. I mean, if you look at the news, if you look at social media, you look at anything going on, this is probably a question that a lot of people are wrestling with. And so this is a great, I guess one of those indicators would be just talking about any of those things.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate something that you said, Tim, which I thought was really good, was that we need to make the gospel personal to people. When we share about man's basic need or greatest problem, however you want to ask this question, and then we share about sin, oftentimes people will just kind of nod and agree. Maybe they don't actually agree themselves, but they'll just, the religion today is tolerance, right? They just tolerate everything, including sinful lifestyle, sinful thoughts. But they'll think that, Christianity is great. I respect you for believing it, but it's really not for me. But when you share that it's not just that mankind has sinned against God or mankind has a sinful nature, but you have personally offended a holy God, then that's when they really understand that it's not just like a general everybody has this problem, but I particularly have this problem. I think that's one of the greatest things when we share the gospel is that God has specifically sent his son to die for your sins. Like you, Bob, Mary, whatever
name you want to
put in there, whoever you're talking to, right? So I think that's really good that you brought that up.
Yeah, I think one really neat thing to just really use is Exodus 20, where it lists the 10 Commandments. And I think one in particular that I enjoy using in evangelism is do not murder. I think a lot of people that we talk to, they haven't committed murder before. And so when we tell them do not murder, they're saying, yeah, that's easy. I haven't murdered anyone. But in Matthew 5, Jesus takes that command even further by saying that if you are angry with your brother, you've committed murder in your heart.
Yeah.
And who of us has not been angry with someone? All of us have. And I think that's one way of just making sin personal is by saying that if you've been angry before, you've committed murder in your heart and you've broken God's law. And thus you yourself have sinned. And so in that way, it's inescapable, right? Then they have to come to grips or come to reality with the fact that they have sinned against the holy God, even if it's just being angry with someone. And then again, there's a new avenue for you to introduce more of the gospel and to get them to really understand that no one has escaped sin.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think something fun that Tim always likes to say, just kind of jokingly, whenever, where I'm going with this, is when someone said, I say, I'm good, Tim says,
no one is good. No, not one. Right? And Romans 3 states that really clearly. And I joke about it all the time, but it really is just a reminder telling us that no one is good, right? No one has escaped the punishment of sin. And it's only by the fact that Christ has saved us, died for our sins, and that we believe in him, that we're able to say that, yes, we are good.
Yeah.
So, and let me give you the answer to whenever I tell that to you.
Okay, I will remember that for the next one. Yeah, it's really fun, and thanks for sharing your thoughts on this question. So one of the things that we like to do with every episode is to ask our guests how their evangelism has been. What are some evangelism conversations that we can be praying for, and people that you've reached out to, whether at the workplace, whether family or friends. If you don't mind sharing with us, sharing with the audience as well, that would like to get to know more about Tim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I had a really fun opportunity 2 weeks ago. Someone came to our church and I was able to run the newcomers meeting at church. And he was essentially interested in Christianity. And so having the opportunity to just kind of walk through the gospel and walk through each aspect of it with him and seeing him just kind of start to recognize that like, oh yeah, like I am a sinner, or like, oh yeah, that this is true. Oh, there is a problem in the world. Oh, Christ came to die on the cross for us. He rose again from the dead. Being able to talk through those points and being able to evangelize to him essentially was really neat. And I appreciated it. He came back to our church, the week after. And so hopefully he keeps coming out. And I think that's really one way that you could be praying for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I guess I have a second one here. Is
Please.
Yeah, talking about my dad. I was able to share the gospel with him more recently in the recent months. And it's always a fun time sharing the gospel with my dad because I share it with him and he's always just like, oh yeah, you know, like I get it. You know, I believe in Jesus. And for me, it's getting him to understand that there is a lifestyle that comes with Christianity, right? Not to say that you have to, it's not to say that there's a list of do's or don'ts or you have to do this rigidly or do that rigidly, but it's to understand that Christians are to pursue and love the Lord in all that they do. And yes, so I preached the gospel to him before, and now it's fun for me to consider, okay, what are different ways to introduce it in different parts of the conversation, so that he understands it in a different way or in a better way.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, if you want to know more about Tim, if you have any comments about anything that we've talked about on this episode, for either Tim or I, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you like this video, please give us a like. If you want to hear more or see more, you can subscribe to this channel. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram as well for some behind the scenes footage. We are the Offensive Line, and this season we're going through the theme of great evangelists ask great questions. And we'll see you next week.